Today, we are digging into a fascinating case where abstract philosophical ideas weren't just for the classroom. No, they were actually used in a real courtroom to send a man to prison. This is a story about how words and who gets to define them can have absolutely life-altering consequences. I mean, just think about that for a second. It sounds completely hypothetical, right? But this is the very real question at the heart of what we're looking at today. How on earth is it possible that a few clicks online, with pretty much zero real-world impact, could lead to something so severe? So let's start with just the bare-bones facts. We have Dr. Chen Jingyuan, a man with a PhD, who retweeted some posts online. For this, he was arrested and charged under this notoriously vague law of picking quarrels and provoking trouble, and he was ultimately sent away for 20 months. You know, the punishment just seems so out of proportion with the supposed crime that you have to ask, what was really going on here? Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we're going to break it down. First, we'll look at the prosecution's case itself, what they claimed happened. Then we're going to examine this whole thing through three different lenses. We'll start with the idea of a procedural breakdown, this error chain. Then we'll zoom out to the philosophy of authority versus power. And finally, we'll look at it as a clash of language games before tying it all together.
First up, let's get into the official story. What exactly did the prosecution say Dr. Chen did that was so bad it warranted a 20-month prison sentence?
So the official indictment boils down to this. They claimed Dr. Chen spread false information, that this was his way of provoking trouble, and that it all caused serious public disorder. But, the entire case really hinges on one single crucial idea, that he knew what he was sharing was false. That's the key. And this is where the whole thing just starts to unravel. I mean, when you put the prosecution's claims right next to what's in the actual court record, the contradictions are just stunning. They accused him of spreading false information, but then the prosecutor literally admitted, we have not verified the facts. They claimed he caused serious public disorder, but they never presented a shred of evidence of any actual disruption. And the big one, they claimed he knew the posts were false, which flew directly in the face of his own statement that he had no way of knowing if they were true or not. So from the get-go, this case just feels like it's built on a house of cards. And that brings us to our first way of looking at this, which comes from a legal analysis of the documents. It frames this whole process as a systematic chain of errors.
Yeah, think of it like a domino effect of failure. It all starts with that weak indictment, based on feelings and assertions, not proof. Because that foundation was so shaky, the trial court had to invent this completely bizarre, illogical argument just to get a conviction. And the final domino, the appeals court just rubber-stamped the whole thing, locking in all the previous mistakes and making sure the injustice stuck.
And this perfectly captures that second step, that illogical verdict. Since they couldn't prove Dr. Chen knew anything, the court came up with this is just incredible, this theory of high education guilt. They basically argued that because he has a PhD, he has a higher cognitive level and therefore he should have known better. It's literally guilt by education, not guilt by evidence. Okay, so the whole legal procedure was a mess, but our next lens takes us even deeper. We're moving from how the law was used to why we should even follow it in the first place. This is where we get to ask, was this an example of legitimate legal authority or was it just raw power? And to help us think about this, we can turn to the philosopher Joseph Raz. He had this idea that for a law to be legitimate, it has to serve us. Think of it like a good user manual for a complicated piece of equipment. It helps you do what you're trying to do, but better. A legitimate law helps us all make better, more reasonable decisions. It doesn't just yell at us what to do. And this leads to a really crucial difference. On one side, you have legitimate authority. According to Raz, it serves reason, it guides us, it builds trust. It's something we can agree to rationally. On the other side, you just have coercive power. And what does it do? It replaces our reason with a command. It doesn't guide, it orders. It doesn't create trust, it creates fear. So let's put this case to the test. Was the system acting with authority or just with power? Well, when we run it through Raz's basic checklist for what makes law fair and just, the rule of law, the results are, well, they're not good. The law wasn't clear, the trial wasn't public, the rules were applied arbitrarily, the procedures were totally unfair. Looking at this, it's not like the system just failed on 1 or 2 points. It's a total breakdown across the board. According to this test, what we're seeing isn't legitimate authority at all. It's just power wearing a judge's robes. And that brings us to our third and, honestly, maybe the most mind-bending lens.
This argument suggests that the crime here wasn't just judged with words, it was literally created by them. It's about how language itself can become a weapon.
So this idea comes from the philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein and his concept of language games. And it's actually pretty straightforward. He said that words don't have one single fixed meaning. Their meaning comes from how we use them in a specific context, a game. For example, the word foul means one thing in a basketball game and something completely different if you're talking about a bad smell. Same word, different games, different meanings.
So what we're seeing in this case is a head-on collision between two different language games. Dr. Chen, the academic, he was playing the academic inquiry game. In that game, the rules are things like critique, analysis, and asking tough questions. The goal is to understand the world. From his perspective, retweeting something is like collecting data for analysis. But the court was playing the state stability game, and in that game, the rules are conformity, order, and stamping out dissent. The goal is maintaining authority. So in that game, the very same action of retweeting is seen as an act of subversion. And one source we looked at puts it perfectly. The verdict wasn't just a description of something that happened, it was a speech act. What does that mean? It means the words themselves performed an action. By saying you are guilty in the context of that courtroom with all its power, the court wasn't just describing a criminal that already existed. No, it was manufacturing one right there on the spot, simply by applying the wrong rule book to his actions. So after looking at this through three pretty different lenses, what are we supposed to take away from it all? Let's try and bring everything together to get the full picture. Well, when you put all the pieces together, a pretty clear image emerges. Procedurally, we see a legal process that was just fundamentally broken from start to finish. Philosophically, we see a system that failed the most basic tests for legitimate authority, relying on brute force instead of reason. And linguistically, at the very heart of it all, we see a crime that was literally constructed out of thin air, just by redefining the meaning of a simple action. And in the end, that philosopher, Joseph Raz, leaves us with this powerful thought that just sums it all up so well. When the law stops serving reason, when it can no longer explain itself in a way that actually guides us, its authority just evaporates, and all you're left with is the noise of a command, backed up by force. Ultimately, this whole case forces us to confront one final, really provocative question. We've seen how everyday words, like false, disorder, and even an action like retweeting, can have their meanings twisted and repurposed. So it leaves us with this to think about. If the law is, at its core, a system of language, who holds the power to define the words? Because whoever that is, they hold the power to define reality itself.